This is Kathy Barnett. I am so excited. My book is getting ready to be released really soon, February 4th. Nothing to Lose, Everything to Gain, Being Black and Conservative in America. I'm so excited. Just wanted to give you guys, again, another taste of the book. This is from chapter 1, Nothing to Lose, Everything to Gain. So listen, in 1960, the Kerner Commission provided a report to Lyndon B. Johnson to help him understand why there was so much unrest in the Black community. They spent, I'm sure, a ton of money to point out the obvious, and that is white racism. That is what the Kerner report highlighted was the reason for so much unrest in the Black community. It's because of white racism, specifically discrimination in home ownership, education, and employment, that there was huge disparities between white community and the Black community, and that's the reason for the unrest. Now, many of us could have told them that without spending all that money. Nevertheless, it's really interesting when you look at the number of Blacks who owned homes in 1968 versus today. Not much has changed. In 1968, the number of Blacks who owned homes was 41.1%. Today, that number is 41.2%. And most of us know that for the middle class, most of us have the majority of our wealth in our home equity. So it's really interesting that in one of the areas where we can have the majority of our wealth, not much has changed for Blacks today relative to Blacks in 1968. And then we begin to drill down a little bit more, and we find that specifically this is the case in those particular cities that tend to lean Democrat. Minneapolis has the nation's largest home ownership gap of 50% between whites who own homes and Blacks who own homes. 74.8% of whites own homes relative to 24.8% of Blacks who own homes. But that's the largest. And then the next one is Albany, New York, with a home ownership gap of 48.8%, with whites owning homes at 68.9% and Blacks owning home at 20%, followed by Buffalo, New York. Then it just goes on and on, where we're looking at Salisbury, Maryland, Bridgeport, Connecticut. It just goes on, and you begin to see a trend, and I begin to lay it out real clearly, not only in education, because we see that today even with Baltimore, Maryland. Remember, President Trump shined a really bright spotlight on the fact that in 6 different schools, not one child in the inner city of Baltimore, Maryland tested proficient in math and reading. How is that the case, right? I remember Frederick Douglass says, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. And when you don't have knowledge, guess what? You're more likely to be dependent on someone outside of you. And so we see these discrepancies. And when President Trump stood up and said, what do you have to lose? I mean, think about it. 1968 to today, all the wealth, everything that has happened, and yet Black home ownership is still relatively unchanged. We got to do better. We got to think better. I want to give a special shout out to Barnes & Noble. Go to Barnes & Noble and buy my book today. Everything to Gain, Nothing to Lose, Being Black and Conservative in America. Blessings.